Thank you very much. As a discussant, I'm definitely not here to criticize Dr. Mahendra's presentation. And in fact, just for the knowledge of the group, Dr. Mahendra has been my teacher also at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, and it is quite an honor to sit next to him as a discussant. So basically, what I would sort of attempt to do is take this discussion to a slightly larger canvas in terms of some of the issues that he raised in terms of the growth, rather than just about sticking to the employment and manufacturing areas as a whole. Before sort of getting into my own comments, I would sort of like to draw a bit of things that I actually liked in the whole presentation and the discussions, things that I find extremely relevant, including the question that you raised, which I was also sort of likely to have touched upon in a small way. But I think the biggest issue that he has raised today is it's not only the quantity of the jobs that are getting created, it is more of the quality of the jobs. Now, the bigger problem that I have in India, and to a certain extent, we are possibly in terms of a crossfire here, so far as the developmental stage that India is in, and also given the fact that we have been, or the previous governments have been more a crisis manager rather than the developmental side, looking at the developmental side of the economics. Now, just to explain that a bit, the UPA government, 10 years of the UPA government, you saw oil prices at $92 a barrel, the average. This government is seeing oil prices at, say, $42 to $45 a barrel as an average. That's a big sort of benefit to a certain extent for any government to actually come up with. The previous government had struggled through periods of financial crisis in 2008, 2009, which also led to a huge amount of fiscal largesse in the economy, which therefore had taken a significant bit of a time to contract. But turning to this government on the fiscal side, I think to a certain extent they are lucky in terms of the global oil prices having come down, which necessarily meant that they had saved a subsidy bill of about 1,20,000 crores, saving on the subsidy, plus an incremental benefit of about 1,20,000 to 1,30,000 crores in terms of additional revenues. So that 2,50,000 crores of revenues, along with the fact that you were presented with a much favorable economic conditions, probably lead us to believe that the economic gains or the headline gain should have been much more aggressive than what is possibly appearing to be. So that is one of the critical concerns for the Indian economy at this point in time, and this is where possibly we get back to the core discussion of today in terms of the manufacturing, in terms of how agriculture has moved, in terms of the services sector, in terms of very pertinent issues that have been raised in terms of the elasticity of the employment. Now, the critical, again, the reason I started off saying that it is more of a crossfire for the Indian economy is that we know what we need, what needs to be done. But the global conditions as well as the type of changes that are needed in a fiscal federalism, which constitutes a 29 states, and where some of the subjects are more state subjects rather than a center subject, it becomes very difficult to turn the ship around. So that I think is one of the crucial issues. Getting back to Dr. Dev's discussion, I think one of the critical factors, of course, it is a known factor that 48% of the labor force continues to be in a sector called agriculture, which gives us only 14% of the GDP. So so there is a lot of scope in terms of actually also improving the share of GDP on the agriculture side. And he rightly pointed out that China actually had developed the agriculture sector first. Unfortunately, we possibly have missed out the sort of interlying manufacturing sector, and this comes back to your point, whereby we are paying a lot less wages in the manufacturing sector, and therefore we, to a certain extent, jumped from the agricultural sector to the services sector, not necessarily the financial services and the IT services. There are a lot of services like the logistics, etc., that goes along with it. But I think the critical issue that really is a niggling problem for me is the informal sector that Dr. Dev talked about. Obviously, the informal sector, the hope is that it will come up to be a formal sector as you get into the GST. But I still don't know in terms of the data, and it is more an evolving story for me, how the GST would actually have an implication for the informal sector, in terms of the fact that the informal sector's survival strategy more was on the tax arbitrage that it was gaining in the previous system. And if the tax arbitrage goes, and if the cost of other inputs continue to remain the same, I am not sure how the informal sector gets to benefit. Which necessarily means that either I give up some of the GDP gains that I see today, or a significant chunk of this informal sector actually needs to move to the formal sector, which necessarily means for me, again, the most pertinent point is that the informal economy, which is supporting the informal unemployment, that really tends to sort of go down in a very significant way. Now, having said that, I really don't 100% believe in the thesis and the theory that goes around in the common discussions today of a jobless growth. Simply because if there was actually a jobless growth in this economy, given the type of benefits that we have got in terms of the educational, whatever little it is, we should have actually seen already maybe bloodbath on the streets, but we don't see that. So the answer possibly lies in the fact that the informal sector has been the most crucial sector, which has provided jobs to the many people that are the younger population which is entering into the job forces, where obviously, and this is a direct request to Dr. Dev, is the measurability of this remains relatively a bigger issue at this point in time. So, for example, if all his studies cut off at 11-12, and I am not really able to map what is the incremental benefit to the job side out of the various programs in terms of the Make in India, the Skill India, and all these relevant things obviously that the government is doing, and we are hopeful that things get better from now on. But measurability becomes a critical issue, which necessarily means that we always get dragged down in terms of jobless growth. We talk very loosely about formal sector versus informal sector, and we really don't have critical data to analyze this whole thing. Now, one of the bigger areas, and this is something that I sort of has come up with discussion when I have even gone to say villages and etc. One of the critical reason why agriculture doesn't seem to be flourishing at this point in time in India, though we have a huge amount of land bank, is basically the lack of that shine to the agricultural labor that is there. So and therefore there needs to be a critical evaluation by the government in terms of how to make agricultural producers sort of relatively be well known, in the sense that, and also to sort of turn the terms of trade more in terms of agriculture rather than the manufacturing sector. And to be very sort of point blank here is that yes, we are patting our backs in terms of the inflation having coming down. Yes, the manufacturers are patting their back and are always expecting the Reserve Bank to reduce the interest rates on the back of inflation having come down. But given the fact that the biggest chunk of this drop in inflation is with food inflation, and the even problematic area is where the government is failing to push up the pulses prices more closer to the MSP, really gives me a concern in terms of the overall income that can be generated out of the agricultural sector. So I think this is an issue which probably the research segment and dialogues with the government should be able to sort of sort out in a more reasonable manner. And this actually gets me back to the inflation targeting framework of a 4%. And therefore, if you want a growth, you better sort of get into an understanding that your inflation can't be much lower than 4%, and hence the cycle of interest rates may not be as aggressive as the manufacturing sector may be looking at. So this is one critical issue that I would be looking at, and obviously the youth unemployment problem that Dr. Dev has talked about, the quality of jobs, the transition from the highly concentrated, low-profile jobs in the agriculture. So that's what I talked about in terms of providing or shifting the terms of trade more in terms of agriculture, providing better infrastructure facilities to the hinterlands. We are doing a lot. The CSR activities of the corporate sector is also geared towards this zone, but a lot needs to be done and to sort of solve this transition problem for the Indian economy. Productivity is a problem, but having said that, the issue that Dr. Dev raised in terms of the employment elasticity, I am really not sure how much of employment elasticity can be generated if, on the other hand, we talk about the 3D printing, robotics, and all the jobs that can be done by technology rather than human intervention. So yes, productivity needs to improve, but the moment we say productivity needs to improve, salary structures may be higher for the skilled employees, but I really don't know, and there I would sort of ask Dr. Dev to clarify on this issue in terms of how therefore he expects the lower segment of the jobs to actually pick up in a very significant way. The other very important factor that he mentioned is obviously the export sector, and to a certain extent this takes us back to the debate that Dr. Rajan, when he was the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, raised, and we had a lot of criticism going against him. He had clearly said it's make for India rather than made in India. So I really don't know where the line is, and the critical worry for me in terms of the export market is that on one side we consider India being one of the shining destinations for capital flows, whatever be the type of capital flows, whatever color that capital flow takes. It is creating a significant pressure today in terms of an overvaluation of the currency. Given the overvaluation currency, I know that the linkages between the currency and the exports are relatively lower, and the bigger issues are that our policies are not geared enough to actually occupy the spaces that are getting vacated by, say, a China in terms of the textile market that he mentioned, which needs a greater focus, and therefore it is more to do with the demand orientation rather than the price orientation which the exchange rate gives. But having said that, exchange rates in terms of driving exports remain important, which therefore brings us to the critical sort of question about the exchange rate management policies of the Indian economy, and whether the RBI is actually doing the right thing in terms of allowing the currency to appreciate. Services being an integral form, that's another very important point that has been raised, and I think what I really appreciate is the fact that is the idea that Dr. Dev has brought out in terms of the co-integration and co-mingling of the manufacturing with the services that would provide the upward journey for the Indian economy. Along with that, I would also add agriculture, which necessarily means that the agriculture and the services also needs to co-mingle in terms of the logistics push, in terms of the cold chains that needs to develop in the economy, the ENAMs that the government had started with. We are seeing some success in certain states, but it needs to be more globalized across India. So those are the areas that I would sort of want to look at in the future in terms of the overall journey for India. And I think the overarching comment here is that we have relatively, and as an agricultural economist, Dr. Dev, I don't know whether he'll agree with me or not, we have relatively sort of have failed to nurture agriculture as an industry, quote unquote, which is possibly giving us the bigger pains today, and China is that much better. But having said that, I actually like the slide that he brought out about China, and I'll try to put the message in a slightly different way. Yes, the China is much ahead than us in terms of the per capita GDP and in other metrics. But what really bothered me about that slide is the social sector indicators that he has laid out. Now, in an economy where my social sector indicators remain so poor, I am not really sure whether even an 8% growth headline number would be able to sort of manifest myself into a larger GDP per capita. And GDP per capita, believe me, is important if I am getting into any debate with a rating agency in terms of upping my rating criteria. The government had been trying a lot with the rating agencies in terms of sort of improving its rating, but I think one factor which is preventing the ratings from going up is the per capita GDP. They have a clear threshold level, and we are much below the threshold level. The other factor that the rating agencies tend to mention is the relative general government deficits. Now, this is a bit of a sort of tricky issue here in the sense that unfortunately what I don't see clearly coming out from the government, yes, there is a lot of infrastructure push, but what I really don't see is that all these revenues that I talked about in terms of the commodity cycle turning lower and that being appropriated within the general fiscal, we don't really see that clearly earmarked towards an infrastructure development. And my feeling is that we should have, or we could have, sort of sustained with a relatively higher fiscal deficit if this was clearly directed towards the infrastructure, and that would have provided for natural multiplier effects in terms of employment generation and growth in the future. So that's an area which is extremely debatable. A lot of people would definitely not side with me given the arguments that go about a fiscal and its implication that it might have on the inflation. But having said that, I think the other critical problem that India is facing at this point in time is the crucial mix between between investment growth and the consumption growth. Dr. Dev has pointed in his presentation about this mix. We have been talking about investment growth, and internally, I think we are still on the page that investments in India cannot grow before an 18 to 22 month period. So we are trying to stick our neck out and we are trying to say that investments will pick up in the 22 months period, but the problem is that within a 22 months period you will once again see a cycle of union elections coming up. And my fear there is that in the aspiration of sort of keeping the power with himself, and in a matter of fact that growth is unlikely to climb higher than the 7.5%, whether this same government which has talked about investments and infrastructure development in the first manifesto gradually gets into more sort of openness in terms of providing doles and consumption biases. Now the problem there is that we will get consumption, we will get kick-started into consumption, but once again that will lead to higher inflation if infrastructure and supply side bottlenecks don't get relaxed in the right way, which necessarily means once again we will be looking at a tighter interest rate regime from the Reserve Bank of India, because now they are more a targeting central bank rather than the previous regime, which used to look at a lot of economic data before sort of arriving at a rate structure for the Indian economy. That definitely would not be favorable for the employment generation, employment growth, make in India, however you basically want to look at this whole scenario. And given that the overall industrial capacity continues to be at about 73 to 74%, that relatively continues to remain a challenge. So the critical point that I'm trying to mention is that the growth drivers for the Indian economy, the incremental basis is relatively missing. Export sector, I really wonder, given the protectionism that we tend to talk about, given the lower growth or a very flattish straight line growth that we see in the global economy, the exports, I believe, is unlikely to pick up in a very significant way, which therefore, in terms of the linkages that he mentioned, might not manifest in Make in India and the employment generation that we sort of talk about. The investment cycle is likely to be poor. Consumption cycle is kicking, but that is unlikely to give growth in a very significant way. So therefore, the challenges, these are the challenges that I sort of tend to mention. Labor laws is another big challenge for the government, and I would say, if I'm allowed to use the word very cautiously, in a closed room, very smartly the government has actually pushed all the burden of the labor laws to the state government. Now there are about 11 states which have sort of picked up labor laws, and they are trying to do something in this direction. But in a situation where, as they've also pointed out, that relatively the sizes of the enterprises are relatively small in India compared to what we have in China. 85% of the manufacturing sector in the formal sector employs just about 50 workers. I am not sure how many enterprises you can actually bring under the ambit of the labor laws, and sort of to that extent it therefore hampers the visibility of India in terms of ease of doing business. Now, we have been talking about ease of doing business, but if I really look at the data on the ease of doing business, we are about 130 in a list of 198 countries in the ease of doing business. We have seen some improvement, but the relative improvement is in my opinion, not very significant. So that is broadly my comments, and just to sort of cap it up in terms of the overall sentiment. The latest June RBI survey on consumer confidence, the percentage of people who said that their incomes have decreased from a year ago has been more today than in September 2013, which was the peak of the sort of mini crisis, if you may call it, for the Indian economy. The second important data that I gathered is the percentage of people who think that the current economic conditions were worse than a year ago is actually also higher than the proportion who think it got better. So these are the two critical factors in terms of the overall sentiment coming out in the survey of the Reserve Bank of India. Yes, in terms of the direction, I don't think that the government is wrong. They are trying to tackle the productivity issues in a very critical way. On the capital side, they are trying to reduce the stress on the stalled projects, etc., etc. They are meeting limited success over there. So that is basically increasing the productivity of the capital. They are trying to increase productivity of labor through these Skill India, etc. So that is the other piece that is getting together. The third piece is the reduced corruption, which are the softer issues that I would talk of for the Indian economy. And these three getting together, along with the demographic dividend that we still have, definitely has the potential to see Indian economy perched up in a much more sustainable 8% growth. I am not sure whether a 10% is a likely scenario for India. I am not really looking at a 10%, but a sustainable 7.5% to 8% with more equitable distribution in terms of the sort of social sectors getting more together in the act of distributing these gains of the economy to the lower down is something what we think is needed and provide the leg up for the manufacturing as also the employment generation. Thank you very much. I think I have deviated quite significantly from the core topic, but I thought it would be relevant in sort of dovetailing it to the core ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sripan. Yeah, I think we will open the floor for questions. First question you've already asked.
Yeah.
Let him answer this if based on what he thinks. Then we'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah. You want to answer each one or collect?
What you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think collect and in the end I can tell.
Okay, that's fine. You wanted another question and then you.
Yeah.
Yes, I have just one question. And it's in agriculture, I see on one hand the government doing some amazing things. Before the UP elections, 1 year before that, the government allowed NDDB to permit Gujarat cooperatives to set up cooperatives outside Delhi, increase the price of milk to 26 rupees from 14 to 18 rupees that the farmer got, and that provided a groundswell for UP. Now Maharashtra is doing the same thing by getting NDDB to start a cooperative in Nagpur. In just 6 months, collections by the new cooperative increased from 90,000 litres per day to almost 11 lakh litres per day. Okay? And the reason was very simple. Maharashtra's cooperatives, largely NCP and Congress, were paying 18 rupees. The government offered 26 rupees to 33 rupees through the new cooperative. Now that's a good story. Farmer incomes increase.
So the question that
Now the second problem is that on the other hand, you have the pulses game, where you allow imports and repress prices to the farmers. So government has a mixed strategies for agriculture, which is hurting part of agriculture, promoting part of agriculture. The beef ban is again something which is hurting the rural sector. There seems to be no cogent strategy to doubling farm income.
My name is Krishan Khanna. We are a 25-year-old think tank and foundation. We work with the central government on policy. I must congratulate both the speakers, but I'd like to have one question for and a comment for Professor Mahendra Dev and one for Mr. Indranil Khan. As far as Professor Mahendra Dev is concerned, sir, I'd like to inform you that we have been on the board of the Ministry of MSME for 3 years, and actually the MSME sector is in a it has been completely ignored. And for example, we do not know where our MSMEs are. They have not been classified, they have not been located, and we are not able to help them. And I shall give you, sir, a note on this. We work very closely with the European Commission through Germany and Switzerland. And for your information, in Germany and in other European Commission countries, which are 37 in number, every MSME is catalogued. Even a one-man show, a management consultant, is catalogued. And it has a lot of advantages. And unfortunately, we have lost 70 years of our independence, and it's only now, and the pressure has come due to GST, which Mr. Indranil mentioned very correctly, but it will not cover all the MSMEs. It will cover only the ones who are in the higher range of turnover. So we have some suggestions, and sir, I'm going to give you a small note on that. Because I think this has been, the reason has been that all the chambers of commerce, with all due respect to everybody in this room, I've been a member of 8 chambers, 4 in Bombay, 4 in Delhi, the big boys have been there. And I've been also a member of the German chamber for 45 years. We have 4 million members, out of which 3.5 million are in Germany, and 500,000 are outside Germany. For example, the Indo-German chamber, with your Indo-German chamber card, you can go to any of the 83 offices in Germany and get the full privilege of a German chamber member. Who are these members? How can it be that CII has only 15,000 members, but the German chamber has 3.5 million members in Germany itself? The reason, sir, is exactly what you said. 99.7% of the members are MSMEs, and the chamber is made for MSMEs. The chamber is not made for Siemens or Lufthansa or ABB or Volkswagen. I mean, they were MSMEs 100 years or whatever when they started. But so that is missing, sir, and I shall give you a note and your comments.
Thank you.
Coming to very good points raised by Mr. Indranil Pan. Sir, we work on agriculture, our foundation, and you'll be happy to know that our farmers earn average 4 to 5 lakhs a year. We work with about 100,000 farmers in Maharashtra. We had invited Niti Aayog, and in March, Professor Ramesh Chand, who is the member who looks after agriculture directly, he was shocked to see what was happening, because we are doing about 300 crore exports. We are only in fruits and vegetables, because the land holdings are only 3 acres per farmer, and they will go down to 2 acres per farmer in the next 3 to 4 years. You know the reasons. So we are concentrating on fruits and vegetables. In 3 years, we should do 400 crores exports. We are doing about 1,300 reefer containers to Europe and Middle East exports. We should go to 400 in exports and 400 domestic sales. What Professor Ramesh Chand, and we have emails from him, which if you want I can share with you. He said this is the vision of the Prime Minister, what you guys have been able to do. Yes, sir, I'll only give you one very small example. Tomatoes, where we were growing 700 crates per acre, we are growing today 3,000 crates per acre. Israel is 4,000. And the reason is vocational training. What is missing in India is vocational training. We think that vocational training is only required for manufacturing. It's required for agriculture and for services. Sir, in China, they have 3.5 lakh vocational training centers for rural China, where they train 50 million people per year. I'll give you the list of courses, what is being taught.
Sir, can I request your question?
There, sir, the question there is, how do you think we can increase this? Because if we could have 5,000 such clusters, like the one which is running in Maharashtra, our exports could double. From 300 billion, we'll go to 600 billion. And so the last thing I just want to mention, that which I don't think has been fully covered by both the respected speakers, is on human resource development, which is school education, vocational training, and complete letting go of the higher education sector, which is in a mess. We had a big seminar recently. We means the PAN IIT, I am an IIT, and we had the minister and all that, and he has agreed that we should open up the higher sector of education, because it has not happened, sir. We had licensed Raj in higher education. Today, 98% of the colleges in Maharashtra and say Karnataka are run by politicians. So these are the three observations I had, sir, and I thought I'll just share it with you.
Yeah, I make a small question, observation, whatever it is. Firstly, thank both the presenters for excellent presentation, and particularly Professor Dev's presentation was full of facts and figures, very educative. My question is that, basically as Mr. Pan said, that none of us believe that what is being talked about, jobless growth, is the correct situation, facts of life. And also I admit what he has said about deficiencies in our measurements, because the informal sector, no proper measurements are available, and in any case even your data showed that beyond 11, 12, even what was available, even that going forward is not available as on date. But having accepted all these deficiencies, the fact remains that corresponding to the growth in GDP, in the economy, the growth in employment was far higher in the previous period than what is happening now. Now, I have not understood the reason behind it, because I don't think your presentation really brought that out. Because all the deficiencies you have talked about in terms of manufacturing, lack of infrastructure and all that, they were there then, they are there now. In case of agriculture, lack of cold chain, lack of food processing units, they were then there, they are now there. And of course, Mr. Pansu, two comments I couldn't understand. He must have meant something slightly different. One is, absence of bloodbath on road for a country like India, where the level of tolerance, level of, the power of adjustment and adaptability is so high. Absence of bloodbath is no measure of the jobs being created. That is one. And secondly, I also didn't understand his comment about per capita GDP, which of course is very important along with the GDP. But the social parameters, etc., only indicates inclusiveness of growth, equitable distribution of growth. But per capita GDP is just a number, GDP divided by population. So social parameters don't enter there. It's just an arithmetic of, if you talk of sustainability of economic growth, if social parameters are not looked at, I agree. But per capita GDP has no direct relevance as far as that is concerned. So this couple of comments I thought I would just mention. And my main question is, why is this happening, that the growth in job is not being commensurate with the growth in economy vis-a-vis the past period? That's my only basic question to Professor Dev.
Good afternoon, I'm Pramod Shah, former chairman of the Institute of Public Service of India, West Indies, and corporate advisor to many Indian and foreign companies. So there are three observations. One is, I think the plan mentioned about the demographic dividend. Now, sir, if there is not enough job opportunity, enough of education, then it may result into a disaster also. So what precautions government and the private sector should take to avoid any unforeseen situation? Number two, sir, about this manufacturing activity, manufacturing and service sector, I feel that as of today, service sector is growing very fast at the cost of manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector improves, there will be a lot of employment opportunity for the accessory industries or the related industries or subgroups, That's all. And number three, sir, do you think that the employment exchange by the government and other bodies, are they working properly, or are they doing something to get the unemployed people employed? And with the development of skills and what? These are the three small observations and questions which we can answer. And sir, you are from banking sector, so we can throw some light on the employment aspect of the banking sector.
With your permission, sir, we'll stop the list
Yeah.
of questions.
Yeah.
We'll complete this round
Yeah.
and then depending on time available.
Yeah. You want to?
No, no,
Yeah.
you can.
No. On our first question, jobs, this wages are lower in manufacturing. That is true compared to, in fact, people are saying advantage for India compared to China, in the other way, some of the industrialists think. But what we are saying is that if you compare agriculture and manufacturing, so the shift will give higher wages. If you see, I have the numbers, the NSS numbers. So manufacturing wages are higher than the agriculture wages. So that shift. But we are not comparing with IT professionals, and in fact, service sector is the most unequal sector because we have a top IT professional getting lakhs rupees, whereas the lower level unorganized sector and also self-employed. The one shopkeeper, a small one, he stays from morning to evening. We don't know the sales and other things, very, very low productive things. So it's very unequal services compared to manufacturing and even agriculture. So in that hierarchy, one is talking about, if you shift from agriculture to manufacturing, for the unskilled workers is much higher wages. On labor-intensive sectors, you said that they are there, but they are not growing. That also I mentioned that some of them are not going. Where they are growing, they are capital-intensive and skill. So that is the thing. If you see, post-reform period. On agriculture cooperatives, yeah, that's right. They are doing better, the milk and other things. And pulses, it's true that last year we imported 6 million tons, which is quite high, and then there is no coherent policy on that. Second, on MSME, yeah, that is an important one given the structure of our manufacturing particularly, or even services. It is generally ignored. The implications of GST, that is an important study to make. You also mentioned GST. What are the implications for unorganized sector and the organized sector linkages? That I think over time only one has to. For me now it's difficult to predict what is the linkage there. Agriculture, he said that there are important innovations, but fruits and vegetables, the problem is the marketing, and also perishables. How do you have this storage and other things? As Dr. Pan mentioned, that agriculture is a neglected area in the country. Most of the governments have neglected compared to the East Asian experience, where the reform started in agriculture. And in fact, the poverty reduction in China is partly due to this and linkages with labor-intensive manufacturing. Because the recent one, if you see, demonetization, of course, one of the effects on agriculture and informal sector, but the prices have crashed for agriculture globally as well as Indian. I inquired in Andhra Pradesh, chili prices were 12,000 rupees last year per quintal. This year 6,000 rupees. So almost half the thing. So some of the suicides are because the cost also they have not recovered from that. So we after 70 years of independence, still we have not done for agriculture. When drought years farmers lose, and good years farmers lose. So that price stability we are not able to give solution to that. So that's which is an important one. The government focus on incomes rather than production is important, but how to go there is another one. School education skills, yeah, I just mentioned, I didn't elaborate the skill development. A lot of literature is there, so I didn't elaborate on that. On the growth of, no, jobless growth, that is to, I mean, there is no jobless growth kind of thing, but we don't know the reality because data is not there. Because 2011-12 is the quinquennial survey, and then recent ones, 2014, 15, 16, shows a marginal growth in numbers. And we have, some people quote CMI data, that also shows decline in employment. But the problem is it's not quantity. I mean, you can generate employment. In fact, employment growth is at the macro level, employment elasticity doesn't make sense because it's a function of labor force growth. Labor force, when the labor force enters certain age, it's about 2% growth. So even if GDP increases 8%, you cannot have 5% employment growth because it's a supply side thing. So elasticity will decline at the macro level. I mean, at the manufacturing level or industry level, employment elasticity makes sense. But elasticity declining because I have not seen anywhere in our history more than 2% employment growth thing. So talking about jobless growth, it's basically you can generate a lot of employment under NREGA or all these things, but it's basically quality of employment. If you are getting 100 rupees or something, it's not enough. So it's not the quantity, but how do you move productivity increase in unorganized sector and then move people from unorganized to organized over time. In fact, one of the slides shows that there is a some shift from organized to unorganized. Regular workers have increased from 13% to 17%. It's a marginal shift. On demographic dividend, I mean the lot of literature on that also. On employment exchanges, I don't know, the data is reliable on that because everybody, even if I am unemployed, I may not register for employment exchanges. So the data generally, we don't use that much in the employment exchange data.
They have been helpful or not?
Yeah.
To the community at large?
Yeah. So maybe a few minutes on some of the issues he raised. On the informal sector, one of the things the CSO is not able to show the impact of demonetization because the data problems. Organized and other easily available, but they use benchmarks. I mean, I was also acting chairman of the National Statistical Commission, so that I know the benchmarks they use, which is not exact ones, whereas organized sector exact ones are there. So informal sector, it will take 1 year to have see the impact. Maybe December 2017, you may get some idea about the impact of demonetization. So the informal sector data is a problem, but the thing is that most of the 90% of the workers are informal sector. So you can't ignore something has to be data much more. We have to. GST implications, as I mentioned, we were discussing even before the lecture about one should have a study GST implications for organized and unorganized sector. Agriculture, I totally agree with him. And then export sector, the comment by Dr. Raghuram Rajan, who was my chairman for the institute. In fact, I spoke to him, the Make for India, Make in India. In fact, he was not against exports. He was basically saying what I said. We can't imitate East Asia or China with the global situation, but still there is a scope. But domestic market is more important, Make for India in that context. But some people thought that he was against exports or something. But I talked to him personally. He was not against exports, but the share, concentrate on domestic markets versus the trade sector. The social sector, I agree. In fact, he was telling the same thing, that unless you improve the social sector, the just per capita GDP may not be only useful, because GDP is only instrument. Well-being is the outcome. So social sector, the outcomes are more important than just GDP numbers. Of course, there is a correlation. If you have more money, you can invest in social sector. Lastly, on the political economy in the next 2 years, I share what he said about 2019 till that time, whether government will go for reform policies or more loan waivers kind of things. Yeah, that's a worry in the next whether investment will grow in the next 18 or 22 months. One has to see. I think with this I stop.
Yeah, I think 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Sure. I think Dr. Dev has answered most of the question. Services sector issue you raised. Now, one of the critical areas how services sector has been growing is also because of the services sector in the GDP includes the expenditure of the government. And because the investment and the expenditure of the government has gone up, services sector anyways has a floor in terms of its growth. Therefore, I'm more or less confident you will never see services sector growth at less than 8% maybe. So that's one issue. In terms of the banking sector employment, my only comment is that I would like to differentiate what we actually from an old hat called banking, which is a very boring institution, borrow to lend, and the other services that have got into the banking sector, which is say the investment banking, etc., etc. Now, obviously, you have heard stories about investment banking in a problem and all those things, but if I really look at the core banking as a service sector, I don't think there is an employment challenge over there, simply because you are getting into financial inclusion, which necessarily means that you are targeting a lot more universe of the population with your banking products, and therefore you need more products to target them as well as more people to market them and people on the street. So banking sector employment from a core banking, which is the core idea of banking as an institution, I don't think there is any problem. Now, to your question on the per capita GDP, I think I may have wrongly communicated, or the understanding. What I really meant was that unless you get your social sector directives correct, and unless, for example, the female participation in the labor force, or even health, or even education, and your human development index actually becomes much better from here on, the incremental benefit to the numerator, which is the GDP, is not likely to be adequate in terms of the denominator. So the social sector sort of fits into that in terms of a concept of the per capita GDP, rather than trying to argue on the mathematics of the per capita GDP. So that if I've conveyed it wrongly, I'm very sorry about that. In terms of the agriculture, yes, I think, sir, you would be a much better person to actually educate me as to how to do it. Absolutely. No, I understand what you are pointing out, but the limited point that I want to make is that maybe I am wrong, but you'll be in a better position to sort of educate me. This is more a concept. The concept that you pointed out is more sort of segmentalized within the horticulture and the industry per se, rather than the broad horticulture and sort of
this cluster,
animal
sir,
husbandry.
This cluster, sir, which I'm mentioning to you, is fully integrated.
Okay.
Processing, cold storage, the works.
No, I understand, but I'm not
it
really.
will not, because professor has very clearly mentioned, it's not going to work otherwise.
No, true. I totally understand, but what I'm trying to say is that you provided the example of tomatoes. So vegetables, horticulture, animal husbandry may be a good example where you can integrate the system in the way you. But the grains, etc., I'm still not sure whether your example works like to like in terms of grains immediately.
We can discuss offline.
Absolutely.
With
Absolutely.
80% less water, 70-80% less chemicals and inputs.
Yep.
There's a lot of wastage, sir, because the
No,
farmers
I
are not trained.
absolutely understand. I
Farmers are
absolutely
not-
understand your point, where there could be a negative political influence also
Not
too.
only the farmers are trained, but even the state agriculture universities, they are not upgraded.
Upgraded.
You know, the quality of candidates which they produce, they are not up to the mark, as per the requirement, and also I would like to say that most of the IITs are doing agriculture value chain these days.
Sorry, agriculture?
IIT, they are studying biomechanical IIT MBAs and they are coming into shift to agriculture.
Yeah.
This shows that the quality of education that SAUs are, candidates who are coming out, they are not par. They are not able to manage the requirement of the sector.
Absolutely, I totally.
So that agriculture being very important, the government has to upgrade the SAUs
True.
in par with the IRA or the central
True.
university.
Point taken totally.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pan. I am going to request Sri Ashit Kampani to say a few concluding remarks, perhaps in a vote of thanks, if I may request a few minutes by way of closing.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Bombay Chambers and Commerce and Industries and rest of the attendees, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Director General Shri Vijay Shrirangan for creating such a good event along with all the staff who supported them. I also must mention with my deep sense of appreciation that Professor Mahendra Dev and Mr. Indranil Pan has given out the thought processes which are very thought-provoking. Some of them have been in the number form, which is very difficult for people to us to just keep on comparing, but they came out so nicely to make sure that what are the values involved into it and how it needs to change over a period of time. Couple of observations, if I may. Most of us keep on thinking that agriculture in this country is not going the way it should, which is true. But the urbanization which is going to come in the next 10-20 years is going to shift the entire scene for people and the human requirement from agri to the new urbanization which is going to. So we need to reskill our people. Continue skilling for agriculture may be good, but it's going to be challenging when the urbanization takes place, when we have another 50, 100, 200 cities coming up over a period of time. The argument for Make for India versus Make in India, the Make for India stands because more and more money gets rotated into the economy, into the people's hand, and that's going to be converted into the consumption. So Make for India is going to stand out more than Make in India, which is going to go out. The most important part here in the whole economy over a period of time is going to be semiconductors, because everywhere sensors are going to be used. Most of our appliances, telephone, anything which we use has semiconductor into it. And today in this country, since last 10 years, government is trying to work to get semiconductor fabs. We are unable to do it. The moment we do it, the entire value chain changes. And it is very important that once that such a decision is taken to get semiconductor fab into the country, the entire electronics will become domestic rather than imported. Because we are doing all the other outer thing, but we are not doing circuits inside and the semiconductor inside, for which we are paying high value to what the imported products are. So we need to make that capex, get it done, so that in future for next 10-20 years our import bill comes down, Make in India, Make for India comes in true, and we are able to export them as well to the surrounding countries. The other point which was mentioned of the informal economy and the GST. Now, the ability of mobile phone is going to change the world over a period of time. Most of us has the smartphone now from the earlier version of the Desi phone. Most of us are going to be able to order everything through our phone, including if you have to purchase anything online. And that is going to change everything. So, if GST has to be included into all those transactions, it is going to seamlessly integrate and get the informal into the formal sector. So we need to look forward and see that what is changing. And if we are able to understand and look forward that what is changing, naturally the past figures may give us some idea of what was happening, but they may not be true for today and tomorrow. I think with these remarks, I would like to not come in between the lunch and all of you. So thank you once again. And I hope that we have the stronger India and the inputs of Dr. Professor Mahendra Dev and Indranil Pan take it to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you,
Finished
sir,
in time.
for your time.
Yeah.
And thanks, Dr. Pan. Thank you. Pleasure listening to you.
Yeah.
To remember us by, this includes a book about the chamber of 100 plus history.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Pan,
Thank you very much.
if I may, I'll come back.
Thank you very much.